Hi, I'm Kelly Monaco. I'm currently unemployed, so I created this channel to earn some extra income. I'll be updating you with the latest news about the Drama General Hospital.
Hello and welcome back to our YouTube channel. We was breathless when I heard the shocking news about Brook Lynn. Brook Lynn never imagined that one reckless decision could split her life into two separate worlds, one defined by everything she had fought to build and the other by everything she now stood to lose. The moment the arrest became real, the illusion of control shattered. What had once been a private terror, a fear she tried to bury beneath excuses, shaky explanations, and desperate silence, was now public, formal, and impossible to outrun. The charge of driving under the influence was not just a legal problem. It was a stain that threatened to seep into every corner of her life, poisoning her marriage, her future, her place within the Quartermain family, and most painfully of all, her fragile dream of becoming the kind of mother Phoebe could depend on. For Brook Lynn, the nightmare was no longer about whether the truth would catch up to her. The nightmare was about what would still be standing when it finally did. From the moment she was taken into custody, Brook Lynn felt the full humiliation of seeing her worst fear made visible. The coldness of the station, the hard edges of procedure, the quiet judgment in every glance around her, all combined into something far more suffocating than handcuffs. She had always been fierce, proud, and resilient, someone who could fight through scandal with her head held high, but this was different. This time there was no clever comeback, no family influence strong enough to erase the image in her own mind of what she had done to herself. She was not merely facing criminal consequences. She was facing the collapse of the version of herself she had been trying so desperately to become. Every time she thought of Phoebe, the panic deepened. The child who needed stability, tenderness, and protection had become the symbol of everything Brook Lynn feared she might never be allowed to have. She was not just afraid of a sentence. She was afraid that one terrible night had made her unworthy of the life she wanted most. What made the situation even more devastating was that the crisis did not belong to Brook Lynn alone. It rippled outward, reaching deep into the Quartermain family, where love and loyalty had always existed beside pressure, reputation, and expectation. No family in Port Charles understood better than the Quartermains how scandal could become currency, how one public disgrace could be dissected, weaponized, and reshaped into something even uglier. Yet this time the threat felt more intimate. Brook Lynn was not simply another Quartermain in trouble. She was a woman standing at the edge of losing the future she had only just begun to believe in. Her family could rally around her, protect her name, spend money, apply pressure, and argue for leniency, but none of that could erase the emotional damage already settling in her chest. The support she received only intensified her guilt, because every person who stood beside her reminded her of what was at stake. Every hand extended in defense felt like a painful question she could not answer. What if she no longer deserved to be saved? Phoebe's place in the story made everything sharper. She was not just a legal detail in a custody process or a hopeful step in a long-awaited adoption plan. She represented innocence, continuity, and the possibility of redemption. Brook Lynn had wrapped so much of her future around the idea of caring for that child that the thought of being separated from her now felt almost unbearable. The fear was not abstract. It was maternal before it was official, emotional before it was procedural. Brook Lynn could feel the life she wanted slipping away, not in dramatic explosions, but in quiet, devastating images. A nursery that might never be used, a family routine that might never be formed, the chance to be called upon, needed, and trusted by a child who deserved constancy. That was the true cruelty of her situation. Jail was terrifying, yes. Public shame was brutal, yes. But the deepest wound came from the possibility that Phoebe might grow up needing her and never be allowed to have her. That fear began to change Brook Lynn from the inside. Anxiety stopped being a passing emotion and became a permanent atmosphere around her. Even in moments of silence, she was not calm. She was listening for the next disaster, the next official decision, the next document, the next conversation that might confirm her life was being rearranged without her consent. Her mind kept circling the same terrible questions. Would the court view her as unstable, reckless, unfit? Would one arrest be enough to destroy every promise she had made to Chase about the family they would build together? Would the worst thing she had ever done become the only thing anyone remembered? The torment did not come only from guilt. It came from helplessness. For someone like Brook Lynn, who had always fought hardest when she still believed she could change the outcome, this was agony. She had entered a world of consequences already in motion, where love alone could not stop the machinery from moving forward. And then there was Chase. If Brook Lynn was unraveling under the weight of fear, Chase was being torn apart by a different kind of suffering. The agony of watching the person he loved sink toward disaster, while every instinct in him screamed to protect her. He was a cop. He believed in rules, structure, evidence, accountability. Those beliefs were not casual parts of his identity. They were the foundation of the man he had worked to become. Yet love has a way of dragging principles into brutal conflict with human desperation, and Chase found himself standing in precisely that kind of war. He could see Brook Lynn's terror. He could see the way she was breaking under the possibility of prison, under the thought of losing Phoebe, under the humiliation of becoming a burden to the very people she wanted to make proud. That sight changed him. It made the law feel cold. It made procedure feel cruel. It made duty feel, for the first time, like a weapon pointed at his own marriage. At first, Chase tried to believe he could navigate the crisis without sacrificing himself. He looked for legal options, procedural gaps, ways to soften the blow without crossing the line completely. But the deeper Brook Lynn's danger became, the more that hope began to die. Her vulnerability made caution impossible. Chase was no longer thinking only as an officer. He was thinking as a husband watching his wife drown. The possibility that Brook Lynn could go to jail, that her name could be destroyed, that Phoebe could be placed forever beyond their reach, pushed him closer to a choice he never thought he would make. The line between protection and corruption began to blur. Once that line blurred, every decision became more dangerous. He started asking not what was right, but what he could live with. He started measuring justice against loss, and in that comparison, his career no longer felt sacred. Brook Lynn did. That shift altered the emotional balance between them. Their marriage, once sustained by trust and shared hope, became strained by a new and frightening form of intimacy. The intimacy of crisis, of secrets, of mutual ruin. Brook Lynn could feel what Chase was considering even before he said it aloud. She knew him too well not to see the war in his face. The very thought that he might sacrifice his position for her protection filled her with two conflicting emotions that tore at her from opposite directions. One was overwhelming gratitude, because in her darkest moment, he was proving that she was not alone. The other was horror, because the man she loved was beginning to step towards self-destruction in her name. That is what made their bond so tragic in this moment. Love was not rescuing them cleanly. Love was pulling them deeper into impossible choices. Every promise Chase made to keep her safe sounded beautiful on the surface and terrifying underneath, because both of them knew that safety bought through dishonesty always demanded a second price later. The Quartermaines, for all their influence and power, could not truly solve that private fracture. They could fight for Brook Lynn's rights, protect her public image, remind the world of her value, and insist that one mistake should not define an entire life. But inside the home, inside the marriage, the emotional damage kept building. Brook Lynn did not just need lawyers or strategy. She needed to believe she was still capable of being loved without being rescued from herself. She needed to believe that Phoebe might still have a place in her future. She needed to believe that Chase's devotion was not another burden she would someday have to repay with guilt. Yet the closer Chase moved towards sacrificing his badge, the harder it became for her to hold on to those beliefs. She wanted him beside her. She needed him beside her. But she did not want to be the reason he lost the career that had shaped his honor, his purpose, and his identity. That is why their conversations, even when tender, became haunted. Every reassurance carried fear beneath it. Every promise about the future felt fragile. Brook Lynn wanted to believe there was still a road back, that this arrest was not the end of everything, that she could somehow survive the shame and still become the mother Phoebe needed. Chase wanted to believe he could shield her from the worst of it without becoming someone he despised. But hope in Port Charles rarely comes without cost, and both of them could feel that cost rising. The danger was no longer confined to a courtroom or a case file. It had entered the emotional architecture of their life together. It had turned their dreams into pressure points. It had made their love feel both stronger and more endangered than ever before. If Chase truly chose to give up his job to protect Brook Lynn, the sacrifice would not be noble in any simple sense. It would be devastating. It would mean that the crisis had pushed him beyond compromise and into surrender, not to the law, but to the demands of love and fear. It would mean Brook Lynn's pain had become so unbearable to him that he would rather destroy part of himself than watch her face it alone. There is something deeply moving in that kind of devotion, but there is also something tragic in it, because it reveals how badly this ordeal has already wounded them both. A man does not abandon his badge lightly. A woman does not accept that sacrifice without feeling marked by it forever. If that day comes, it will not feel like victory. It will feel like the moment they chose each other against the world, while knowing the world would never let them forget the price. And that is the real power of this story. It is not simply about an arrest, a scandal, or the threat of prison. It is about what happens when one mistake begins to devour everything built around it. It is about a woman terrified that her worst night will erase her chance at motherhood. It is about a child, Phoebe, whose need for love becomes the emotional heartbeat of a future hanging by a thread. It is about a family trying to protect one of its own while quietly wondering how much can actually be saved. And above all, it is about a man willing to lose the thing that defined him if that is what it takes to keep the woman he loves from breaking apart completely. Brook Lynn's arrest may have started as a legal disaster, but it is becoming something much more painful and much more human, a test of identity, devotion, and survival. If Chase and Brook Lynn make it through, they will not come out unchanged. They will come out marked by everything they were willing to risk for each other, and by the terrible knowledge that love, however powerful, cannot prevent consequences from leaving scars.
I'll be back at the General Hospital soon. We'll see each other again soon. Thank you for supporting my channel. Goodbye and see you again.